Hi, it's Sarah Altair, and this is Mystery Monday, where we talk about all things writing mysteries. So, welcome. Each week we have a focus topic, and then we have the Ask Me Anything questions and answers. So, let's get started. The beginning, the first steps in your mystery story. And for new writers, this can be really daunting. There's so much information out there about um, the first page, the first 10 pages, the first chapter, getting into your story, what needs to be there, should you have a prologue, shouldn't you have a prologue. There's just so many things that can be super, super bewildering. So let's focus on your readers. I always think that's just the best place to start. Uh, Today's readers want a good story because your beginning sets your reader up for the rest of the story. Lose them at the beginning and you won't get them back. They just won't come back. They're not going to turn the pages. They're not going to skip ahead to see what happens next. They're just gone. So your goal at the beginning of the story is to get the readers involved in the story. So you want to start with a story. I know when we talked about scenes, we talked about each scene being a story, and this first scene is like a mini story that gets your reader into the story. They get to know your detective, and this is where they begin to empathize with your character. And all that work that you did creating your character and working on them in your character Bible is going to pay off when you get into the story. So I love there's author and writing coach called Bonnie Johnston, and she has developed what she calls the 40 sentence story outline, and I just love it because the other way that you can get totally lost is reading about story structure and 3 acts or 4 act structure and what's the inciting incident and oh, did I do this right? And is this in the right place? So let's see how Bonnie suggests starting out your story. It's business as usual for your protagonist. That's your detective, who's being his sympathetic self while he chases his dream until something throws him off stride. Could be someone messing with him, or could be he slipped up. Okay, that's it. That's the beginning. And as you can see, you have so much leeway in how you introduce your character. But what it is it starts with a problem. There's a conflict. So how this translates to mystery is introduce your detective. Bang on, there he is. He or she is doing something. And I suggest for mysteries that you also show him or her, using one of their skills that makes them such a good detective. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but show them using the skills so your readers get an idea of what his strengths are. And then give him a problem. And this can be something really simple, but give him a problem and show your readers how your detective solves that problem. You're going to introduce your detective's personality and how they respond when they're thrown off track. Okay, that's the first. And then here's Bonnie's suggestion for what comes next. We see what's special about him as he does his best to recover from the stumble, but we also see what sucks about the rut he's stuck in and how his flaw or wound is keeping him there. So we're getting more into your detective and more into the story. You notice there's no prologue here. There's no backstory. We don't need to know a lot. We're jumping right into the story, and I really advise that you approach your story beginning in this way. Throw them right into the story. There's plenty of time much later on to give your readers more information about their backstory. If they have a wound, possibly how it happens. Don't necessarily have to have that. But not now. Not now. It's story, 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 story. Get your readers in there. Get them involved. Get them on your detective's side. So if we take Bonnie's suggestion and focus it in on mystery writing, your detective pulls out his usual problem solving, but misses something important because, well, his thinking isn't working right, his ego gets in the way, he has a temper, he has an inability to deal with women, whatever flaws you have chosen for your character. This is what you bring your detective up against right away. So your readers understand that, oh my gosh, this guy creates his own problems. You still want them rooting for your detective. So, you're gonna, once they've met in that first chapter, once they've actually met your detective and seen him in action, and now he's stumbled, but he doesn't really fix the problem yet. Everybody has problems, and I think one of the reasons that people love mysteries is that by the end of the story, the problem is solved, and so you are introducing your reader to your detective's problem-solving abilities and the ways that your detective is limited. Okay, so once again, here we go with chapter 3 and Bonnie's suggestion. He thinks he's getting his groove back, but instead he staggers face first into the inciting incident, which irrevocably screws up his life and starts the clock ticking on his story goal. So, I just love the way she phrases this. I think they're very easy for creative writers to understand. There's no labels. And I think this is, I know it, working with beginning writers is where they often get stuck. They're so worried about, am I fitting the formula, that they lose track of their story. And Bonnie's guidance really helps you focus on how to move your story forward. I just love these. Okay, so let's think about your detective now as he's getting his groove back. So he thinks he's making progress, and in spite of his flaw, suddenly the murder looms large, which turns things upside down. So this is where the murder comes in. However you introduce the murder to your detective, this is the first thing that's going to happen. There's a murder, and it's going to be your detective's job to solve that murder. And he may have been doing this other thing that we've just read about, but now he's got this bigger thing that he has to deal with. And depending on whether your detective is a professional or an amateur, is going to tell your readers a lot about why your detective needs to solve this murder. So he must solve this murder, or so you need to give your readers the or. Does that make sense? Okay. So all right. First attempt. So chapter 4. All right. And here's Bonnie's sentence. He didn't handle that very well, did he? So he indulges in one or more coping mechanisms as he muddles through the aftermath, resolving to get his life back on track. So for your detective, takes a step back. At this point, they're usually finding their first evidence. They're looking for clues. They may interview their first suspect, possibly the person who discovered the body. This is his first entry into solving the problem and getting acquainted with the puzzle. He's not solving the puzzle yet. He's still figuring out what the puzzle is, who's involved, what does the evidence suggest. So you get to play with that a lot. Your detective gets new information, and this is where you can plant your clues, and possibly clues that your detective misses the first time, or in a conversation with a suspect says something that seems meaningless at the time, but is actually very important. So you get to play with this a lot. I think part of the big fun of writing mysteries is creating the problems for your detective to solve, and then bringing your readers along on the journey, on the puzzle solving journey. And then chapter 5, your protagonist has a new plan, and it's a great one if it wasn't based on his misbelief. But something has changed, and whether he recognizes it or not, and things get a little rocky as he executes it, now it's time, your detective has a plan. He's seen some evidence, he's interviewed one or more suspects, and he's got an idea of where he's going to go and what to do next. But he has absolutely no idea that he's overlooked something important, like that snippet of dialogue that was false. And he starts tracking down the suspects and looking for evidence. So that's kind of the overview of the first few chapters of your book. So you're starting out with your detective facing a small problem, including, oftentimes I know in crime stories, it starts out with the detective solving a different murder or apprehending a suspect. So we get to know right away that he has talent. And this is going to vary with who your detective is. So you can see that all the work that you've done before, your characters, backgrounds, your research, your story ideas, are all going to come into play as you weave them all together into your story. So what I love about the 40 sentences is they ease all those plot thoughts for new novel writers. It's so easy, and I've seen so many writers struggle with, do I fit it into this form or that form, or where exactly is the inciting incident, or how do I know that I am, entering Act Two, and all these questions that come up with these, guidelines from gurus. So you cannot go wrong with focusing on your story. And, if you need to readjust the outline of the plot, my suggestion is that you do that in your editing stage after you've written a story. For now, when you're beginning and taking those first steps, you really want to get into the story flow and get your detective front and center and let them shine in your reader's eyes and get them sympathizing with your character. Show how they solve problems. It doesn't have to be a big problem, but just show how their thinking works, how their puzzle solving skills are displayed. So your readers get an idea that, yes, they want to follow this character through an entire mystery. That's your job at the beginning, is bringing your readers on board and bringing them into the story. Once again, I just want to stress that these 40 sentences are just so solid about creating story, and that you have such incredible leeway in bringing your detective into action. And you get to focus on letting your detective shine as the person that you have created, rather than worrying about where you are in the plot structure. It just makes a lot of sense to me. So all your research and world building, all that stuff, you get to bring it in here. And if you're a nonlinear writer, you're able to insert your scenes wherever they're going to go in the story. And I think one of the ways that this 40 sentence outline really helps all writers, not just beginning writers, is that it keeps you from going off track and getting lost and writing yourself into corners without worrying about structure. So I'll put a link in the show notes to the entire 40 sentences, not just the first 5, so you'll get an idea. And in that document, there's also a link to a video chat with Bonnie about the 40 sentences. So I hope that helps with giving you an idea of how story is the most important element in bringing your readers into the beginning of the story. Okay, ask me anything. Let's see what we have. Okay, I've got my story, but how do I choose a title? Oh, wow, that is a super great question, because a title is a key to getting potential readers connected with your book. And it's one of the first impressions, just like your book cover. It's one of the first impressions on book buyers, and it needs to be interesting and gripping and relevant to your book. And finding the perfect title can seem overwhelming. And there are reasons why many authors save creating the title till after they've actually finished the manuscript. They may have a working title while they're working on the story, but they actually create the title after the story is finished, because the title represents your book. So some key elements when you create your title: you want it short, you want it easy to say, you want it easy to remember, you want it simple, and you also want it to reflect your genre. In this case, We're writing crime and detective stories, mysteries. Okay. So choosing your title is really a process that starts with brainstorming. So make a list. Make a list. Just every title idea that you think of, no judgment at this time. Just write them down. Make a list of your title ideas, and you can certainly start this as you're writing your story, and your list can keep growing. And then you're going to hone it down using those guidelines, short, easy to say, easy to remember, simple, and shows your genre. So if it's too generic, it's not going to tell someone who's looking for a new book to read, it's not going to tell them what your genre is. So you want to have some kind of hint that it's a mystery. Okay. And so it's like any brainstorming process. You go wide and then you just keep narrowing it down, narrowing it down. And I hope that helps. And then I also have one caveat about titles. In traditional publishing, the publisher may choose a different title, and some authors have fought and won, and some authors have fought and lost. So if you're going into traditional publishing, just be aware that the publisher may change your title once they accept your manuscript. Okay, next question. Oh gosh. Do you have any tips for writing dialogue? Yes. There's just so many tips about writing dialogue. But just remember that dialogue is conversation. And dialogue is conversation between and among characters. So, my number one tip is to listen to other people talk. I just think it's so important, and it's part of our developing our skill and our craft as a writer, is to really get those rhythms of speech that other people use, and people in different social strata, so you have a sense that the suburban housewife is going to speak differently than the street kid. I know that sounds obvious, but you really want that to reflect in your dialogue. So go out, listen to people, take notes, um, make recordings if that's possible. Um, Listen to different people on YouTube. That's a good way to hear a lot of different speech patterns and rhythms. Because when you're writing your story, each character has a voice. And this is where know your character gets really important. And another tip I have about writing dialogue is when you create your character in your character backgrounder, try adding a phrase or a speech pattern for each character, as well as their physical description or backstory or their wound. People go really deep into some of this stuff. So include dialogue in your character background so you really have an idea of how that character talks to people. And so practice is the key, and keep writing. So I want to thank everyone for those are really great questions today. So thank you very much. Practice is the key, so keep writing. I can't stress that enough. If you're just starting out, write. Don't wait for the magic moment. Just start doing it. And the more you write, the better you'll get, and the more you'll improve your craft. So if you know someone who writes mysteries, please let them know about Mystery Monday. and invite them to listen. If you can't be here live on Facebook, um, every episode is also on YouTube, so you have access there as well under Mystery Monday. And thanks, and I will see you again next Monday.